Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's going on, families? Ethan Orfe for the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Yes, sir. Fantasy Football Podcast this week, hosted by, of course, the GSMC Podcast Network. Have a lot of interesting things to talk about today. Chock full of stuff in my papers. If you listen to me on a weekly basis, first of all, I appreciate you. Second off, I've got a lot to talk about. I like to take my notes. I like to have my handy dandy piece of paper on today's piece of paper. 6 segments like usual. I'm going to talk about some XFL, some different strategies in fantasy football. One of which that I want to get into is the idea of hoarding players or hoarding positions. Talk about the quarterback carousel that is taking this offseason by storm. Finding the next Lamar Jackson in fantasy, quote unquote, question mark. Some general offseason topics like Jason Peters, testing free agency, freeing the market. Jacksonville potentially rebuilding, or maybe they're rebranding, not too sure. And then I'm going to finish off by going over some fantasy football league manager etiquette, or more like how to run it, the keys. I'm going to give you all the keys to success. But first, the XFL Fantasy Week 5. Week 5 is coming up, and Week 4 had a lot of interesting things happen around that I don't think anybody was really prepared for. So, as we know, Week 4 gave us an interesting, I guess, I don't really know what to call that Vipers game versus the DC Defenders. It was a blowout, of course, and this was the second blowout in a row for the DC Defenders where they have come out on the losing side. And this one was really just, it's not a good look. It makes you really question what the first 2 weeks of the season really meant for not only this team in particular, but also for the XFL in general. And I'm going to be real with you guys. I don't really know what the answer is for them as far as a team. I don't really know what to look at. Cardell has regressed times 2 now. Thought the first or the third game was pretty bad. This one was almost as equally as painful to watch if you support Cardell and the DC Defenders. It just didn't look up to par. And they play a team that's essentially the second hottest team in the league, outside of course, the Houston Roughnecks. But the Battlehawks have it together. They have game plan. They know what they want to accomplish. Tomo is a stud, in my opinion. I love that guy. He's my favorite quarterback in the league to watch play, and they just know what to do. They may not be a deep ball threat team or a team that really, really gets it in the passing game, but they know they play comfortably to what they are, and they know who they are, I should say. I don't know what the DC Defenders are. I don't know who they are. I do know that you can't have Cardell Jones missing all these passes all the time. And I don't want to make the Friday podcast always seem like a Cardell Jones hate show, because this is not what it is. I want to see him be successful, but you just have to call it like you see it. He's missing throws really badly, and you saw this his last year at Ohio State, and nothing really has, everything has transferred since then to his game now, and he hasn't really progressed in a way to where you can kind of trust him to really be accurate with the football. Regardless, here we go. We're going to talk about some guys that definitely going to affect your fantasy decision making, fantasy plays. What's the deal on all of this? So first up, Trey McBride had another nice game in week 3, or he backed it up from week 3 and week 4 in the second straight 100-yard performance. If he is not your number one wide receiver to look at, to pick up in daily fantasy, I don't know what you're doing at this point. It's looking like he is making the case that he's the best wide receiver in the XFL. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy you look at to lead next season. Even there's a few that I'm watching. PJ Walker, for instance, he's never going to leave the tier 1 of the quarterback position in the XFL. Just not going to happen. He's the best right now. And 2 below is Josh Johnson and Tamu, who had equally good games last week. And it seems like when Nelson Spruce gets back, that Josh Johnson, the Wildcats, will have the best wide receiver duo on any roster anywhere in the XFL. Like, they are just that good together. They're that nice. But if you really think about it, there's only like 3 wide receivers that I'm really, really considering that are like Cam Phillips is amazing, but that's because the Roughnecks, essentially they just run. They're kind of like the Houston Rockets. Speaking of Houston, I feel like the Houston Rockets of the XFL just pass. Well, at least the only way you can translate it in football is, air raid. They are air raiding around. And, Nelson Spruce, he did miss week 4. So that was a bit tough for him, but you just got to take what you can get, and what we got is what we know, is that Trey McBride had another good game, and I believe that can carry over in the bottom line. How about some running backs? We got to look at, of course, Cameron Artis-Payne, who is having a great year alongside his partner in crime, Lance Dunbar. This is kind of reminding me of the two-back special from 2018 from the New Orleans Saints. Not as explosive. They're both kind of bigger guys, but they're doing it all different types of ways on the field, catching, running, all that. They look good, man. Dallas has really turned it around from their first weeks. A little bit of, disappointment when they did end up losing to the Battlehawks. And I remember they were definitely the favorites in that game. And then it looks like maybe they shouldn't have been, because the Battlehawks, to me, look like the second best team in the XFL. And they were a bit underrated. And you can't always, Vegas hasn't been the best at this right now, or at least, let's say Vegas is still going to win, but the lines have been all over the place, and they've kind of smoothed out a bit over the past few weeks now. But in the first 2 games, I know for sure the line was all over the place. Over-unders were 50 plus, and now we're seeing more consistent football overall, and I'm just ready to see this league really grow. Oh, speaking of which, two more quarterback things. Landry Jones, that injury was gruesome. It did not look good. I fell for that man. I hope he does get better, though. As far as, I hope he can bounce back again. But that didn't look too good. And then BJ Daniels, man. It's just like Seattle just finds a way to repeat themselves all the time. With the Seahawks, looks like the Seattle Dragons are following a similar path, maybe not running the football as much as the Marshawn years, but maybe they found their Russell Wilson or their discount Russell Wilson right now. And BJ, he looked awesome when I saw him play. They lost another tough game where I feel like this league is just, there's like I think there's top heavy, of course, and you have your clear number one, and then everybody else can pretty much win on any given Saturday and Sunday. There's like no in between. I think the league is now figuring out what its parity is and how competitive it can be. I think now these games are getting a bit more fun because they're more competitive rather than, oh, this is new. This is some fun. And that's all good for us because for a while I was feeling like fantasy might have gotten a little stale for this league, and now it's getting a little bit better as more guys are starting to emerge and make a name for themselves, and they're going to start attracting more attention for people who enjoy the league and play the fantasy stuff and do the gambling, because bigger names make them kind of pseudo stars. And once you have the star power in this league, that's when it's going to actually take off, in my opinion, because leagues are ran by stars at the end of the day. All right. So, we're going to take a break and then we're going to get into some more fantasy topics.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, so flashback to fantasy season 2018, I think. This was an interesting year for me. I decided to embark on a journey that took me to new heights as a fantasy player. I made it to playoffs that year, and I thought that I found a strategy for the next few years that was going to lead me to success. I remember the draft very vividly. It was a draft that I felt very strong in, and I didn't know what was going to happen afterwards. So, anyway, that was the year I drafted, I believe, Kareem Hunt. I drafted Jordan Howard, which was not the bane of my fantasy existence. Jordan Howard. This is when he was on the Bears, and that was the same year that Tariq Cohen was on the Bears, and for some reason they just stopped running Jordan Howard. It was the toughest scene in fantasy for a good minute. But I had those two. I also had Mark Ingram at the time, I believe, which was awesome because in 2018, him and Kamara were quite the dynamic duo, and they were getting it done and firing off on all of the cylinders. So, I bring this up to talk about hoarding different positions or hoarding different players at the same position in the strategy of this and how it kind of evolved over time and why maybe I laid off a bit, or I will after this year, considering I didn't get to accomplish it too much this year anyway. So in the draft, come in with a strategy all the time. You want to have your draft boards ready, and you got to have some good running backs because, especially if you're playing PPR, which most of the leagues I were playing in at the time, You want to get the guy that can catch and run up the middle and is a touchdown machine and is a vital part of the offense in that system at the time. So I was all in on some of these guys I was seeing in training camp, and I started picking them up. I was like, these guys are going to blow up. I really believed in Jordan Howard in 2018. It didn't work out for me. But, that's just fantasy and how it works. But then the strategy got addicting. There was one year, the Saquon Renaissance, when he came into the league first year, had him, Melvin Gordon, and I believe I had somebody else at the running back position that year. I had to, or else the strategy just wouldn't be as potent as it was. But I was just hoarding running backs. And this is another thing. I wish NFL.com saved not only the history of the league as far as winners and statistics, but I wish they saved your lineups, because I tried to look back and find these lineups so I could be more accurate with this. But unfortunately, that was not the case. Anyway, let's just say I had a really strong running back in, roster. And I was just hoarding them around. And it got to the point to where I had so many that I was just waiting I wanted to see what the market was. Because I'm sure that at some point running backs get hurt or they slow down, and you kind of have to have a good surplus, in my opinion, if you're going to play that strategy, because you never know which one is going to, Marlon Mack. He was also one of them. Regardless, you have to have a strategy to pull this off, and you need a good amount of running backs to make this work. But I really wanted to get into the game of the market game, the selling game. People have super, super high ceilings, and you just sell them at the highest place to get more, better players, and eventually you move on to a more balanced team later on down the line. This is what happened in 2019 for me, and it still got me in the playoffs, but it was still a tough go. Injuries and stuff. The injury train, I like to say, never misses the stop in any team's league. They always will find their way to your team's front door and drop off the Amazon package of death. But here we are, hoarding players. This is a good strategy. I'm not I don't know anymore. Just because I don't think people like to trade anymore. Trading has become such a pain to me in fantasy leagues. Everybody thinks they're getting scammed and nobody wants to trade anymore. I'll talk to different league owners that I'm in with, and I'll feel out some guys, or I'll look at my wide receiver position, which has historically for me always been hit or miss. And I'll be like, I need to fill this out. I need to improve my team trade by trade. And it's just nobody wants to get, the low end of the stick on some trades. You can talk numbers, you can talk efficiency, you can say, this guy's about to take the league by storm, or you can look at this, that, and the third as far as advanced stats, and they're just not trying to hear it, because everybody's been fleeced at least once in fantasy before, or you've had a trade that you thought would be good for you, and then all of a sudden, boom, the player you got hurt, or the guy that you gave away ended up just staying hot the whole time, and you lost that, and you didn't get as much of a return as you wanted to, and you feel like it didn't pay off in the end, so you just get turned off from trading and, talking to other league owners in fantasy football, and it hurts everybody else, because at this point, now, the way I've been playing and how I've seen other people play is the team you draft is typically the team that you have for the rest of the season. And for some guys, it's just not how they like to play fantasy football. And they see it more as, of course you're still trying to win games, but some guys see it as like like a real like GM simulator, essentially. You know, you're trading players, you're trying to improve. And of course, it's all up to chance. It's fantasy football. They have to perform on the field, but you know, there are some guarantees. There's some sensibility of consistency in fantasy to where you can do this and have a fun time doing it. And it hasn't felt fun for me to do stuff like that in a little bit. So, I don't think the hoarding a certain position strategy will do you any good unless you just have everybody, you hit the mark, you hit the A+, and nobody else you have somebody who's severely struggling. But 9 times out of 10, the person that's severely struggling doesn't want to give up the player you're looking for, or maybe they don't even have a player that you're looking for, because usually if you're doing bad in fantasy, and I mean like bad, a trade isn't going to turn your season around, so to speak, as much as you think it should, just because you probably drafted bad, or you got the bad end of the stick, somebody got hurt for a season-ending injury, and you can't get off the contract, or it's not contract, but well, essentially your 1-year deal with the player. So you just kind of got the crappy end of the stick there. You drew a bad hand and you have to play it. And that's how fantasy has been for a little while now. It's just, you have to play your hand, and trading somebody to improve their team when you know it's bad, they're just going to think you're trying to rip them off of their one good player, and you're going to give them a low end deal, when in reality, you're just trying to slightly improve because you just have too many players. You don't know who to start anymore. You don't have a strong lineup of guys that you can put out there and trust that they're going to be the ones to get it done. You don't know who your general stud starters are anymore, because everybody has stud potential. And that's what I was figuring out, is that there are guys that I believe in. Of course, there's big names that I had, and there was also guys that would be hot for 3 weeks, and you're just like, wow, I know this guy is a guaranteed 16, but the guy that I have on the bench, he's had 20, 22, 19, and back-to-back weeks. Do I put him in again and risk it? Or do I put in this consistent guy who I know is going to show up and do his thing because the coach calls for his number every time, because he's the bona fide stud in real life, so to speak? It's really, really a tough conundrum, in my opinion. You just never know. But we're going to take another break, and then we're going to get into the quarterback roundtable discussion of the off season.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So the thing that, as you hear my paper in the background, the thing that has been keeping up football fans alike all around is this football carousel, which is the quarterback roundtable, quarterback carousel, the round table, I like to call it, because they're all having these individual meetings with each other, I believe, and saying, where am I going to go? Where are you going to go? Where's he going to go? Because it seems like everybody's waiting for one guy to make their decision, so that way everybody else can potentially make theirs and shake up the league. This is kind of like the NBA free agency last year, where the league was just shaken up. Kevin Durant and Kyrie left. LeBron got AD, the Clippers thing, then, Zion to New Orleans. It's just like the league had so much going on. There's a lot of parity, supposedly, and I still believe the league is very parity-wise in the NBA, but that's a different topic. Now it feels like quarterbacks are kind of doing this right now, where there's a lot of guys in the mid-levels that could get a quality starting job at the same time are not top end of the line guys, or else there wouldn't be a carousel, so to speak. They just would get re-signed to a mega deal. So the guys on Mahomes, the Lamar Jacksons, the Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, of course, is big signed. But these sort of guys who are already into their contracts, and seemingly some of the better quarterbacks in the league don't really have to deal with this. But there's also unique situations. So like Tom Brady, who I believe is the guy that's going to set a flame to this whole round table, is constantly in the media, not him in general, but just his name for what's he going to do? Is he going to leave the Patriots or is he going to stay? And, there's a lot of different talking points. Ryan Russillo made a really good point I heard on his podcast recently, talking about there's either two ways you can really think about it. It's like, why would he leave? He's had all this rapport. Why would he want to go start over somewhere else? And he's already this late in his career, and it just doesn't sound like it. Like, of course he wouldn't want to start over if he stays. And then if he leaves, well, he's been tired of the Patriots, not giving him his just due, or tired of Belichick not giving him his just due, and he wants his money. He's taken X amount of pay cuts for the betterment of the team, and their wide receiver core has not looked good. Essentially for the past maybe 3 years, it's been really just Amendola when he was there, or Edelman, and then when Gronk was still playing, it was Gronk, and then Brady just kind of had to make do with whatever else he had. So it all starts with Tom. Wherever Tom decides to go, I don't know if the rumors are true. There was a report today or yesterday where Tom Brady and Bill Belichick had a conversation, and the quote said it did not go well. Or the reporter claimed that it did not go well. So we don't know what that means. It could just be posturing, as what a lot of people think this all is. It's just posturing to see if it seems like a big game of chicken. Who's gonna collide? Who's gonna cut? Which one's gonna turn? And I don't know. But I also feel like Tom Brady is a guy who doesn't like to mess around. And if he gets if the guys end up doing him wrong again, he's just gonna go, because he has that power, and he doesn't feel the need that he has to be in one system to be a good quarterback. But granted, we've only seen him in one system. Why go learn something else? Why go get used to this lifestyle? But I think Tom Brady is so into winning and so into being Mr. TB12 and all of this, that his ego is probably so sky high to the roof. He thinks that he can go out there and do this. And you can look at it. He can look at a guy like Brett Favre or Kurt Warner, where, their careers were at the back end when they decided to leave and go somewhere else and essentially start anew. But even, Brett Favre retired twice. When he retired, came back out, and he went to the Minnesota Vikings and almost went to the Super Bowl. So Tom Brady has to look at this and be like, okay, why can't I do this? Granted, he's not retiring, but why can't I do this? Phillip Rivers, same thing. He'd had a bad year for his standards, really shocking decline off the cliff, but he's got to be looking at the quarterbacks that are in the league right now and who have started, and I can still play at a level above them or at their level. I can still do some things. Maybe it was rough in LA with the Chargers, maybe there was some off the field stuff, some behind the scenes stuff going on to where that he wasn't feeling what was going on and it affected his game. Or maybe there was like an injury or something that wasn't really talked about, but here it is. I'm going to try and do better and get another opportunity somewhere else and start anew. So, the Indianapolis, of course, has been on the radar for Phillip Rivers. I still feel like that'd be an interesting team for Tom Brady to go to, even though it's kind of weird because of the Peyton connection to all of that. But Phillip Rivers wouldn't be a bad pickup. What does that mean for Brissett? I don't know. Maybe he gets traded. Maybe he just gets stayed as a backup. But if Tom leaves, what does the Patriots do? Maybe even if Tom stays, what do the Patriots do? Because he can't stay for too much longer. He says he wants to play till 45, or he feels like he can. So you have to be mentally prepared for Tom Brady to do that. And there's a lot of teams that are thinking about their futures, their immediate futures. Like, you have to believe that the Saints have to be looking at their immediate quarterback future, as even though Drew Brees has said he's come back, they don't really have a general backup anymore because Teddy Bridgewater is assuming to make $30 million this offseason to whatever team he signs for. And even after that, Taysom Hill, who presumably might have been the starter if Brees decided to hang it up, and I was never a fan of that notion, but they have no backup. So what's the plan of attack? Are they going to go in the draft, or are they going to find somebody in the off season to, buff up their quarterback room, get some guys in there that can not only help keep the system going, or even so, find their next guy? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. You have to find the next guy to keep the train going. You pay all these guys who are not quarterbacks because you need all the best skill positions and best defenders to keep your team really good. And you just don't pay a quarterback because you have him on a rookie salary or anything like that, or a cheap salary. And that's what wins Super Bowls right now. Because once you pay that quarterback the super max or the biggest contract, all of a sudden the team can't afford a wide receiver, or you can't afford an offensive line, or you have defensive problems, and then it becomes the quarterback has to win it all show because they have nothing else around them, because they're making $100 plus million 5-year deals and stuff like that. Like, look at, even though they still have weapons, but look at the Atlanta Falcons. They're having a really, really tough time with their cap right now because Matt Ryan just signed a pretty big deal a few off seasons ago. And they have to be really, really smart with their money. Granted, their core on the talent level seems to be enough to get them pretty well in the NFC, but they haven't put it all together, and they can't get people to put it all together through free agency because they don't have any money. They just lost probably the third best fantasy tight end, probably from the past 2 years, because they just can't afford him. They have to let him walk. And I don't think he wanted to go, but that's just how the cookie crumbles and all that. We shall have to wait and see who starts it off. My money is on Tom. We're going to take another break, and we're going to get into more quarterback discussions, primarily about fantasy quarterbacks and who you should be looking at to pick up to have a big surplus of points come your way. That's coming up.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
In last year's offseason, there was so much buzz about who was going to be the next Pat Mahomes, who could be the next guy, or it was all about Pat Mahomes rather. And we have to look at who's going to explode, who's going to be the guy that explodes next in fantasy. And we didn't know if it was going to be a quarterback, wide receiver, or running back, who's going to be it. And what turned out to be was Lamar Jackson, not only just exploding, but on insurmountable, never probably will see this level of production in a fantasy season from a quarterback again, from just using his legs and passing, or maybe he improves. I don't know. You can't limit a guy's potential, especially after what he's already shown you. Regardless, here we are. Lamar Jackson, amazing player. Did a lot for fantasy community. People fell in love with him even before last year, and then he just doubled down on it with his performance this year, where he won MVP, and it was not even close. So who can be the next guy? Who can be your next Lamar Jackson, so to speak? And I'm going to take a few looks at some quarterbacks let me finish my sentence. Because quarterbacks generally have the ball majority of the time in their hands, so thus they can be the ones to, I guess, explode. I'm seeing now quarterbacks over the past 2 years now, a little bit of a sample size, explode on the scene in quite different ways. We've seen it before in the past, like with Michael Vick when he came back in this return tour with the Eagles, where it looked amazing for that first year. And then that was the idea of the dream team come in next year, and then it kind of fizzled out. But we're looking at quarterbacks also that may not fit Lamar's mold, but could have some big time years coming their way. So first, I think is probably the obvious is Kyler Murray. I think Kyler Murray, of course, he kind of fits the idea of this dual threat quarterback, this new age of quarterbacks, the guy that can really, really pull it off because of his skill set. He's really, really quick, ran a 4.5 on the combine, and you know, it was pretty secure in a lot of people's minds that he's going to be the next guy, so to speak. He had a pretty decent rookie season. It was really slow in the beginning. Kingsbury figured it out, and they looked a lot better down the stretch. They looked a lot more competitive, and you have to hope that he doesn't get into a sophomore slump, and he's going to be a guy that can take a leap. And leaps in football can only come from working hard and game planning, and for other teams to not expect you to do what you do. So I think Kyler Murray, for one thing, he has to have weapons around him that can really get him going, and I think they need to have guys like they did get in the regular season, like a Kenyon Drake, who can really get you like a safety option, or a guy that can really help your quarterback out. Like, you used to be the tight end all the time. Like, the tight end is your safety net. You can pass it to him and lean on him to get you the ball and look at your reads, because usually if he's a pretty good tight end, he can essentially make you find your reads a bit better. But nowadays, it can be anybody. You can throw it to the running back, or do a wide receiver screens, or just anybody who has solid hands, good route running, people that you can trust. So if you can put some people he can trust behind him and a system in place to where it just seems like it's going to work, then it's going to be awesome, man. Like, could you imagine Kyler Murray in a Shanahan offense? Like, put Kyler Murray, I almost said Kyle Shanahan, or Kyler Shanahan, but put Murray in the 49ers offense, you might be seeing something absolutely unbelievable. But I still believe Kingsbury can do something pretty nice over there. And we're not too sure what their schedule is going to be as far as inside the division, because their division is usually always tough. But we've seen in the past that it can kind of shake up, and they've been a little bit of the punching bag in recent years. But it always kind of moves in and out. And we're not sure what the Rams are going to look like. Seattle is going to be Seattle. We know Russell Wilson is the second best quarterback in the NFL, in my opinion, and a guy that you always want to be aware of. He can make a play. He can do really, really amazing things with the football, with the pigskin. And, you know, Arizona is a team trying to retool. They've been rebuilding for a little bit. They had a setback. And they've been growing. They've had some growing pains last year. So that's the same thing with Lamar Jackson, I believe. It feels very similar. And granted, Baltimore got into the playoffs because their team overall was better at the time than maybe Arizona was. But they're going to figure it out. And I wouldn't be surprised if Arizona makes a push and is way more competitive going in. All right, the next guy, of course, is probably my controversial one, is Baker Mayfield. And I have to say Baker Mayfield on the grounds of he can be a good quarterback. I think he can. I think he has the tools. I think we saw enough in college to where he can be really, really good. The problem is, in college, he was doing so much more timing stuff. He was creative, but it was in the flow of that Oklahoma offense. He just wasn't running around throwing a football 50 yards, 60, 70 yards down the field every single time. It was very much precision, timing routes, quick reads, and quick decision making. When you have Baker trying to go through progressions very long, not a lot of protection, that's where you lose him. That's where they lost him. And it was very visible that he was frustrated with himself and frustrated with how the team was playing, and he put a lot of onus on himself, but also it just didn't look like it was going anywhere, and he was taking a lot of shots at different people, and just, you know, his personality is kind of like a pit bull, you know, he feels, and the guy that was not betted on, or people betted against him, and now he's in this position where he feels like that's the only way he has a chip on his shoulder. But I'd like to see Baker Mayfield improve on some things, and with a new head coach, it seems like the Browns have kind of retooled their organization, and if they can get Odell back in the end zone for everybody's needs in the fantasy community. So please, Baker Mayfield, let's help me out. Let's get him back in the end zone. Let's look at Odell having fun playing football again, because it was not fun for a lot of guys out there. It was very frustrating. Of course, they lost one of their better receiving threats out there at the tight end, and was it Njoku? I believe so. And it was just a really, really tough go. he lost him at the beginning of the season. That's really tough, and it's hard to make grounds for guys who are showing a lot of promise at their current position. He might also be a sleeper at the tight end position. So those are my two, really. Other than that, if it was me, I'm not looking for the next Lamar Jackson. At least not in like my main leagues or leagues I'm really trying to compete in, because I still feel like you know what you know. And when you start messing around with quarterbacks, of course, there's like a quarterbacks kind of have a threshold where you know where the points are going to come from and where you're going to get them from, and you kind of know where you can draft certain guys and where you can't. So it's just a better bet than to bet on a home run. But congratulations to those who did hit the home run for Lamar Jackson. Let's see if you can do it again. All right, we're going to take another break, and then we're going to get into some general off-season news and topics.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
All right, thanks for sticking around. Time for our general off-season news and topics that we usually try to get involved in every week, because you always got to keep the conversations going, and you got to find the new thing, the next big thing, the next big topic. These are all kind of generally a little bit small in scale, but could have big potential later on in different people's lives, so I like to talk about them. For one thing, for Bills Mafia, my side piece NFL team that I follow lightly but cheer for in my heart when the wife's out of town, so to speak. When I'm not cheering for the Saints, the Bills have my AFC heart. The Bills, of course, are looking to have an extension done with their superstar cornerback, Tre'Davious White, one of my favorite players to watch at the position. Tre'Davious was he was definitely a top 5, maybe even top 3 cornerback last year. One of the leaders of the Bills defense last year, who got into the playoffs, and they really showcased a lot of good skill, and he's one of the better guys out there. And they could be major players in free agency in the next few weeks when the new league year opens, and they know they got to be able to get all their best players done and get so that way they can look further on into the situation. They have more than $82 million to play with this season to upgrade their roster. And with that, they can do anything. I love to see them get a wide receiver. That'd be dope. Only because I believe getting somebody over 6 foot is very paramount in the wide receiver land. I don't know why, but it seems like the Bills always know what to do with defensive backs. I must look into the DB coaches over the years, because I was a big fan of, who was it? Man, he went to the Saints and his career kind of tailed off because of injury. Jarius Byrd. Jarius Byrd was super good back in the day on the Bills. Then, of course, Stephon Gilmore, and now we have Tre'Davious White. It's just getting out of control back there with their secondary. Really good. Like them a lot. Let's move on. Next, Jason Peters to test the market. Now, Jason Peters is a name that everybody knows, and if you follow football and follow the Eagles, you know Jason Peters, you know what he is. He's been one of the more remembered Eagles in Philadelphia and one of the more fan favorites. He played there for 11 years or 10 years and could be there for the 11th season. And they're letting him hit the free agent market, and they will be in contact with Jason Peters throughout the whole process. They are probably, in my opinion, I think the Eagles are looking to probably move off. But because you could see a big payday from a team in need of a quality blocker, and the reality of the market likely drives the Eagles to this decision. They feel like the situation where if Peters doesn't find a deal or location he's seeking, Philadelphia could reassess, and they just know where their money is and where it's not. He was a little bit hurt around, and he's had injury problems in recent years anyway, but when he was healthy, he remained one of the top tier left tackles, and he had a 6 overall tackle grade from Pro Football Focus last year. And if he does return, you got to believe that the Eagles will have a really, really good O-line, and he'll be on the opposite side of Mr. Lane Johnson, another guy who is an offensive line stud that we should be always familiar with. Next, the Jaguars. How do I feel about the Jaguars and what's going on? So they get rid of, or they trade away Jalen Ramsey, a top-tier cornerback. They trade away their other one in A.J. Bouye. They're losing ground on guys in the front 7. Their defense is literally getting ripped apart, and I just feel bad for that fan base. I don't really know what's going on. I feel like this is a teardown, but not in a sense of a teardown to rebuild, as in like the whole idea of rebuilding is you're going to be bad, you're going to suck for the next X amount of years, and then through the draft you'll build a new team, a new identity, and be better off in playing the long game, the long con. Well, I'm not sure if they're trying to play the long con, because if that was the case, I don't think Leonard Fournette would be here anymore. Or maybe he might be on the move too. You never know. But I just don't see it coming. Like, they're trying to shop Nick Foles around. But do we know that means Gardner Minshew is their guy? Can you say that Gardner Minshew is a guy? I don't know. I can't be too sure about any quarterback these days. You never know who's going to bottom out or who's going to have a tough year. This is just a really odd behavior for a team that just 2 years ago was being talked about as being a dark horse Super Bowl contender if they find the right quarterback. Not even a year ago. Last year, they had a lot of expectations coming out of the AFC South, and it just did not pan out the way they wanted to. Of course, they throw a touchdown, everybody's celebrating, and then Nick Foles is hurt, then Gardner Minshew comes out, and then all the stuff with, of course, cornerback, like relationships with your cornerbacks and your secondary, and then guys getting suspended and on the field issues. It just didn't look good. It was kind of a train wreck. And then Leonard Fournette was also around, and sometimes he wasn't. Sometimes he would play, sometimes he wouldn't. And he turned it on near the end of the season, but in the beginning it was kind of rough. We didn't know what was going on. And I feel that was for a lot of different players this past season. So maybe it was just a bug of the what's going on bug. I need to workshop that. I don't really know what to call that right now, but it feels like it was a big, what's going on? What's happening? What's going on in the news? But yeah, man, the Jaguars are really, really really, really making me feel like they are not the team to be looking for guys, even though you saw like DJ Shark have a really interesting fantasy year last year that a lot of people may be looking at again as a guy who might be able to do some things. And I'm not too sure. I might stay away because it doesn't look like the Jaguars have winning on their minds right now. I don't really know what they have on their minds. We just have to wait and see when the free agency comes around what they're looking to do with all the money that they would have, or the money they have available and the draft picks and that they're acquiring through these trades. But yeah, AJ Bouye is gone. Also, speaking of who is about to potentially be gone is Trent Williams. So Trent Williams looks like he is allowed to seek a trade. He's had a lot of talks with Ron Rivera, but it doesn't look like this is going to lead to him staying in Washington. It looks like the ties are going to be severed there. And even though Ron Rivera reached out in hopes of mending the fences, Williams does not look like he wants this to do, and he desires to leave the Redskins in the rear view. One of the better tackles in the football world, and he wanted a new contract or to be traded, and it looks like they're not going to pay him that money. So I wonder what they're going to do with that. I wonder who they're going to get, if it's a draft pick or is it going to be a player for player trade. But I wonder what pick would go for a nice left tackle. Maybe a third rounder, second rounder. I would probably trade a second round pick for him. Second round and another pick, or a second round and a player or some money. But it's got to be a team that is going to restructure his deal, I would suppose, like he wants to. So maybe we see one of those situations like we saw with Khalil Mack, where Khalil Mack is traded and then signs a mega deal or something like that. But you just never know. So that's about it. The Bills, Jason Peters. We did a lot of offensive tackles today. It's good talks. Shout out to the big guys. So we're going to take our final break, and then we're going to get into our last segment of the day.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
All right, so the closer for the day, closing statement, closing segment, the last topic, the last ride, keys to the last ride, keys to running a league, and I mean a fantasy league. I am not a professional league runner by any chance or any way, shape, or form. I am no professional. I have just played for a long time. I've ran family and friend leagues for a while. And, you know, fantasy football, you don't have to be an ultra professional to know kind of some good pointers and some tips. And, you know, people ask me all the time, especially people who know nothing about fantasy life and fantasy football in general. They want to know what's it like to do all this stuff. And this is just one of the major components of doing league stuff. Is if you want to play fantasy football, at least in a league standard format, there's got to be a league commissioner, and commissioning can be a challenge. But I got 3 tips for you today that could make your commissioning lives a lot easier. Or if you're new and want to get into commissioning, here's 3 beginner tips. Number 1. Understanding your owner's skill levels. So every league has owners, depending on how many you have, can vastly change how your league ends up turning out. There are people that have anywhere from 8 to 16 teams in a league, even deeper than that. But yeah, you have a lot of players that I think 12 is a good spot, or 10 even. I played a lot of 10-man leagues when I was younger, just because I didn't have that many friends that played fantasy, or I didn't know that many guys that were into fantasy as much as I was at the time. And you just have to know what's the skill level. Are these guys in it to have fun? Are they in it to, be competitive, win some money? Are they super into it? Like they're kind of like a try hard, so to speak, like, the gamer term try hard, where they do everything in their power to win, even if that means taking the game kind of a bit too seriously, even if that, I don't know what exactly that means. It's weird, not to go on a tangent, but the idea of try hard is so weird because there's a negative connotation of, there's like levels to it. Like there's being competitive and doing everything you want to win, especially like in sports. But I guess it's like, in basketball where you have people on defense playing really, really hard and doing anything they can and being savvy and trying to get the upper hand on the offense. And then there are guys like Grayson Allen back in his college days, tripping people and pushing people and doing anything to win. But essentially that does still hurt the team, so to speak. Regardless, that's how tryhards are viewed in gaming and in fantasy, so to speak. So they can just be kind of negative people. Regardless, understanding your owner's skill levels and personalities, that's number one, because then you can manage your league from then on. If you know your guys are just here to kick it, have some fun, just for something to talk about in your group chats and for bragging rights, then you know how to manage your league like that. If you're more in it to win it, there's money on the line, then you got to understand how strict you have to be. The rules got to be deeper. Everybody's got to understand and be on the same page about stuff. You got to make sure that stuff is in writing, in talks all the time, because all it takes is just a simple misunderstanding, or somebody does something and boom, you have a firestorm in your league. The group chat's on fire. You got email threads going back and forth and everybody's upset. And you're the only one with the fire hose and you got to put it out. Number 2. The acronym CREAM. Cash rules everything around me. Go get the money. Dollar bills, y'all. Shout out to one of the greatest rap groups of all time. But CREAM. Cash rules everything around me. So if you play for money, this is for the money guys that want to get involved with the, betting with their friends and doing all this stuff. Always make sure the league money is secured before the league starts. Do not, I repeat, do not, for your sanity as a league owner, say you can pay me in a few weeks. Do not start that league, because it's just you can't depend on people in real life. It's just hard to do. I'll be real with you. It's hard to depend on people, especially when money is involved, and people have to be on it and be competitive. You can't trust it, man. You can't trust it. So what's going to happen to you? That guy is going to wait until you bring it back up, and you're going to be busy dealing with life and fantasy on your own end, and you're probably not even the only league you're in is commissioning. You're probably doing other leagues too to fill in the void. And everybody just plays multiple stuff, and then you got you have to watch games and you just forget. And then you start to remember, oh yeah, there's a pot. There's a money to this. And there's like one guy who hasn't paid. He's getting out scot-free. He's rent-free in a league where everybody else has coughed up X amount of dollars. And if they find out this guy hasn't paid, they're going to be looking at you. They're going to be looking at him. They're going to be wondering what's going on. Some people are going to be like, I'm out of here. The guys that paid and all of a sudden are at the bottom of the league, but they paid their money and they're just straggling along. And they see that in that group chat. They probably haven't responded in 5 weeks, but they're going to respond to that. And like, oh yeah, I'm sending the Cash App request right now. I'm putting it in. I am getting my $20 back. I'm getting my $100 back because this guy has just been playing rent free, has not paid a dime. And I'm sitting here stressing every week for some money that essentially I knew I didn't need, because you shouldn't be betting money if you shouldn't bet money that you're afraid to lose, or money essentially that you don't have. So these guys are betting money that, of course, you shouldn't be afraid to lose, but you still want to win it. And fantasy is it's very stressful when it gets down to the nitty gritty. So you just got to be able to make sure people don't blow up the league. That's really what commissioning is all about to me. Make sure your league doesn't blow up. If your league blows up, then essentially you look like Roger Goodell in the eyes of the fans. The fans' eyes of Roger Goodell generally is not good. They don't think he's a good commissioner. You don't want your league calling you Roger Goodell of your fantasy football career. That's not a good sign. And literally anything can happen. It's kind of like managing a child. I don't have kids, but when I read stuff about children and about new parents, or you're a new parent, and the first 2 years is just making sure the child doesn't hurt itself by walking off a cliff or running into stuff all the time. That's how I feel managing a football league is for fantasy football, is making sure somebody doesn't run off a cliff. All right. I kind of went on a tangent there, but number 3, everybody can't be happy. And this is referring to league parity. Can't make everybody happy, but you can try and make your league as fair as possible. This means you got to step in when that trade happens, man. When that trade proposal happens and somebody's making a deal that's going to ruin the competition of the league, you have to make a decision. And I'm not saying you have to veto it, but whatever you do sets a precedent for the remainder of your season and potential future seasons if you're running like not only just a one and done, but if you're doing keepers or you're doing a dynasty league, you have to keep the same energy. That's what I should name that. Keep the same energy. Because if you say you veto it, you're going to have to veto a whole lot of other stuff. And them folks are going to be upset. Those guys are going to be mad. They're not going to be happy about it. They're probably going to berate you in the group chat while other guys are saying, good job, commish. Can't make everybody happy. But the next year or even the next few weeks, somebody else tries to do a trade that doesn't seem fair, and folks are saying, you got to veto this, got to veto that. Look at the facts, look at the trade, and then you could do what you got to do. Be the commissioner that you would want. And that's where I end the podcast on. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Please don't forget to rate and review us so we can keep the lights on, keep this thing going, and hopefully get even better as, these podcasts keep going. Don't forget to follow us on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and our Twitter. And I'll be seeing you guys next week. Peace out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.